Welcome back, learner. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to unpack some fascinating knowledge.
All right, so you've sent over a bunch of stuff about infection control and work, health, and safety, which is super important. And for this deep dive, we're going to focus specifically on part one of this unit, right?
Yep. This is good.
Okay, perfect. So what we're going to do is kind of like extract the key takeaways, like the really important stuff, and then we'll try to make all the connections so you can feel super confident without getting like totally swamped with all the details.
Makes sense. A clear path through the information jungle.
Yeah, exactly. So, just like peeling back the layers and getting to the heart of each topic.
Love that analogy, peeling back the layers. All right, so where do we start?
Well, you started off with a specific standard, the National Safety and Quality Health Service Standard.
Yeah, right. The NSQHS standard, the one that's all about infection prevention and management.
Standard 3, yeah, that's the one.
Standard 3.
Yeah.
You got it.
So before we even jump into the details, what's the big idea behind this standard?
Well, the goal is pretty ambitious. It's all about making sure healthcare is as safe as possible.
Ambitious is right.
And the best part is it's not just about like checking off boxes on a checklist. It's about actually creating a culture where everyone is thinking about infection prevention, just being proactive.
So it's like everyone's responsibility.
Totally. From preventing that very first germ from spreading to making sure we're using antibiotics wisely, like they're a precious resource.
It sounds like there's a lot to unpack here, like it's not just one simple thing.
You got it. There are several really important aims within Standard 3, each playing a crucial part.
Okay, so let's break those down. The first one that really jumps out is reducing the risk of preventable infections. And this is for everybody, patients, consumers, healthcare workers. It's like, the first line of defense.
Absolutely. Prevention is always the best medicine, right?
Right.
But, being realistic, even with the best prevention, sometimes infections still happen.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. So what then?
So another key part of Standard 3 is making sure those infections are managed effectively, like having the systems in place, knowing what to do to stop them from spreading, and making sure we can minimize the impact.
It's almost like having a plan B, right? You try to prevent it, but if it happens, you got to be ready.
Exactly. Always be prepared. And speaking of being prepared, you can't talk about healthcare these days without mentioning antimicrobial resistance.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. Scary, even.
It is. And Standard 3 takes it very seriously. One of its aims is to prevent and contain antimicrobial resistance.
Mm-hmm.
We're not just thinking about treating today's infections, we're thinking about making sure we have effective treatments for tomorrow's too.
Right, because if the medications we have now stop working, that's a huge problem.
Huge. And that brings us to another important aim, making sure antimicrobials, like antibiotics, are prescribed and used correctly.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned that earlier, antimicrobial stewardship.
Right. Antimicrobial stewardship basically means we need to be really careful with these medications.
It's about using them wisely, only when they're absolutely necessary.
Exactly. So that they keep working and we can slow down resistance. It's a big deal.
Makes perfect sense. And, looking at the bigger picture, another aim of Standard 3 is using resources appropriately.
Yeah. We have to be sustainable in our approach, make sure we're using what we have effectively and in a way that can continue over time.
It's like, don't just throw everything at the problem. Be smart about how you use what you have.
Exactly. We have limited resources, so we have to be wise.
So if we bring all these aims together, what's the overall impact of Standard 3? What does it do for healthcare?
It basically provides the roadmap, the framework for healthcare settings to think ahead about infection risks, deal with infections effectively, and contribute to the bigger picture of fighting antimicrobial resistance and using resources sustainably.
Okay, so Standard 3 is really comprehensive. It's not just about one thing. It's about lots of different things working together.
Totally. It's a big picture approach to infection control.
Awesome. All right, learner, your next point is all about real-world scenarios. So let's start with something that might seem super basic, but it's the foundation of infection control. Not washing your hands after touching a person.
Oh, yeah. You wouldn't believe how many people skip this step.
Yeah, it's tempting to rush, but we know it's crucial. So what's the main infectious risk there? What are we worried about when someone doesn't wash their hands?
Well, the thing is, people, even when they seem perfectly healthy, can carry all sorts of microorganisms on their skin.
Oh, yeah, we're covered in them, aren't we?
Yep. Invisible little hitchhikers. So if you touch someone and then don't wash your hands, you could pick up those microbes and then transfer them to yourself or even worse, to other people.
So it's like an invisible chain reaction.
Exactly. You touch someone, pick up their germs, then touch something else like a doorknob, and those germs are just waiting for the next person to come along.
And then, boom, they could get infected.
Exactly.
Okay, so hand washing is non-negotiable. But what are some practical control measures we can put in place to make sure it happens consistently?
The first one is pretty obvious. Make sure there are plenty of places to wash your hands. Easy access to sinks with soap and running water, plus, those alcohol-based hand rubs everywhere.
Yeah, like readily available, so there's no excuse.
Exactly. And the second thing, which is really important, is making sure everyone knows when to use what.
Oh, yeah, right. Because it's not always the same, is it?
It's not. So if your hands are visibly dirty, like you've been handling something messy, soap and water is the way to go.
Got it. Soap and water for visibly dirty hands. But what if they look clean?
If they look clean, you can use either soap and water or the alcohol-based rub.
Okay, so either one works if your hands look clean. That's good to remember. What's the next hazard on our list?
All right, this one's a bit more serious. Incorrect handling of sharps.
Oh, yeah. Sharps, meaning things like needles, right?
Exactly. Needles and other sharp instruments.
And, I think everyone kind of knows that there's a risk there, but what are we most concerned about? What's the specific infectious risk?
The biggest worry with incorrect handling of sharps is exposure to blood-borne infections.
Bloodborne.
Yeah, things that are transmitted through blood, like hepatitis B and C and HIV.
Right, because if a needle accidentally pricks someone who's infected, those viruses can be transmitted directly into the bloodstream.
Exactly. It's a direct route for those viruses to travel.
So what can we do to prevent these kinds of needle stick injuries? What are some key control measures?
Well, the ideal situation is to not use sharps at all, if possible.
Right, eliminate the hazard altogether.
Exactly. If you don't need a needle for something, then you don't have the risk of an injury.
Okay, but obviously there were times when needles are absolutely necessary.
Totally. So the next best thing is to use what we call engineering controls.
Engineering controls.
Yeah, these are safety devices that are built into needles or sharp instruments. They're designed to cover or shield the sharp point after it's been used.
Oh, I see. So it's like an extra layer of protection built right into the device itself?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That way, even if there's an accident, there's less chance of someone getting poked.
That's a really good strategy. So the last hazard you had on your list was something that we see every day, especially during cold and flu season.
Coughing and sneezing.
Coughing and sneezing, yep. Specifically, not covering your mouth and nose when you do it.
You see that all the time, unfortunately.
So what's the infectious risk in that scenario? Why is it such a big deal?
Well, every time you cough or sneeze, you're sending out a spray of tiny droplets into the air.
It's like a little explosion of germs.
Exactly. And those droplets can carry infectious agents. So if someone coughs or sneezes without covering up, those droplets can land on other people or on surfaces, spreading those germs far and wide.
It's like an invisible spray model of germs.
Yep. And those germs can cause respiratory infections, things like colds and flu, even more serious things.
Ugh, not good. So how do we control that spread?
The most important thing is to teach everyone to cover their coughs and sneezes properly.
Cover your cough, cover your sneeze.
Right. Use a tissue if you have one and throw it away immediately.
Yeah, don't just leave it lying around.
Exactly. And if you don't have a tissue, cough or sneeze into your elbow.
The crook of your arm, yeah.
Right. Just try to contain those droplets as much as possible.
Okay, cover your cough, cover your sneeze. What else can we do?
Hand hygiene is essential. After you cough or sneeze, even if you cover up, wash your hands immediately.
Okay, so even if you use a tissue, wash your hands afterwards.
Yep. Just to be extra safe, get those germs off your hands before you touch anything else.
Great. So it sounds like the key takeaway is to be mindful of our coughs and sneezes, contain them as much as possible, and then wash our hands. Okay, moving on. Your next point takes us into the microscopic world.
Yes, the fascinating world of microbes. It's a jungle down there.
You asked about viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites. Let's break down each one. What are some key things to know about viruses?
Well, viruses are incredibly tiny, and they have a very simple structure.
It's super basic.
Super basic. And here's the thing. They can't survive on their own.
Oh, they need something else to live, right?
They do. They need a living host cell to survive, to reproduce, and to spread. Without a host, they're basically just inactive particles.
Wow, so they're like little pirates invading and taking over our cells.
That's a great analogy. They're like little hijackers. They attach themselves to a host cell, and then they inject their genetic material inside.
And then what happens?
And then they use the host cell's machinery to make copies of themselves. It's like they trick the cell into working for them.
That is sneaky.
Super sneaky. And often, this process ends up damaging or even killing the host cell.
No good. And then all those new virus particles are released to go and infect even more cells.
Exactly. A chain reaction of infection.
Yuck. Okay, so viruses need a host to survive. What are some common infections that are caused by viruses?
Oh, tons of them. The ones we hear about all the time, like COVID-19, influenza.
The flu, yeah.
Right. HIV, which can lead to AIDS.
Yeah.
Meningitis can also be caused by a virus. But it's important to remember that bacteria can cause meningitis too.
Oh, good point.
And then there are things like herpes, chickenpox, measles, mumps. The list goes on.
Okay, so viruses are tiny, they need a host, and they cause a wide range of infections.
Exactly.
All right, next up, bacteria. How do they differ from viruses?
Bacteria are a bit more complex than viruses. They're single-celled organisms, but they can reproduce on their own.
So they don't need a host cell to make copies of themselves.
Nope. They're independent little critters. They have all the machinery they need to divide and multiply all by themselves.
Wow, so they're like little factories churning out more bacteria.
Exactly. And they can also survive on surfaces for a lot longer than viruses, sometimes for days or even weeks.
Wow, so they're pretty resilient.
Very resilient. And they can enter the body through all sorts of ways.
Yep.
Cuts, scrapes, any kind of opening in the skin.
Natural openings too, right? Like our mouths and noses.
Exactly. Bacteria are everywhere, and they're pretty good at finding their way in.
Okay, so what kind of infections do bacteria cause?
Tons of them. Common ones like urinary tract infections, those are caused by bacteria. Dental abscesses, pressure ulcers, skin infections, especially if you have a cut or a bug bite.
And what about more serious infections like strep throat?
Strep throat, definitely bacterial. Tuberculosis too.
Right, tuberculosis. So bacteria are single-celled organisms. They can reproduce on their own, and they can cause a wide range of infections, just like viruses.
What about fungi?
Yeah.
When I think of fungi, I think of mushrooms. But I know it's a much broader category.
You're right. Fungi are a really diverse bunch.
Yeah.
Mushrooms are just one type.
Right.
We've also got things like molds and yeasts.
Right. Molds and yeast.
And they love damp, dark places.
Like under the sink, in the bathroom.
Exactly. Now, most fungi are harmless, and some are even helpful, like the fungi that are used to make penicillin.
Oh, yeah. Penicillin, that's an important antibiotic.
Right. But some fungi can cause infections, especially in people who have weaker immune systems.
Okay, so if your immune system isn't working as well, you're more vulnerable.
Exactly. And one way people can get fungal infections is by inhaling fungal spores. These spores are kind of like tiny seeds that fungi use to spread.
And where do these spores hang out?
They're everywhere. In the air, in the soil. You often find them in decaying vegetation or in areas where animals have been.
Like animal droppings. Exactly.
So what are some examples of fungal infections that we might see?
Oh, lots of common ones. Athlete's foot, yeast infections,
Yeah.
jock itch, ringworm.
And thrush. That's a fungal infection, Mike.
Right. Thrush is a fungal infection of the mouth.
Yeah.
And tinea, which is a general term for fungal skin infections.
Okay, so fungi can be good or bad, and they can cause a variety of infections, both on the skin and inside the body.
That's a great summary.
Awesome. Okay, the last type of microorganism on our list is parasites. What makes a parasite a parasite?
Parasites are organisms that need another living organism to survive.
They live off of another organism.
Exactly. They live in or on another organism, which we call the host.
The host is the organism that they're living off of.
Right. And they get their nutrients from the host.
So they're basically freeloaders.
Pretty much. Now, some parasites don't cause much harm to their host. They just kind of hang out and benefit from the host's resources. But others can cause all sorts of problems.
Like what?
Well, some parasites can grow and reproduce really quickly inside the host, and that can damage the host's organs or tissues.
Oh, yeah.
Others can release toxins that make the host sick.
Oh, that's just nasty.
It is. And in some cases, parasites can even contribute to sepsis.
Sepsis. Isn't that a really serious complication of an infection?
It is. It's a life-threatening condition. So yeah, some parasites can be pretty dangerous.
Okay, so parasites live off of the host, and some of them can cause serious illness. What are some examples of parasitic infections that we might encounter?
Tapeworms are a classic example.
Well, tapeworms, yeah.
And then we have things like Chagas disease, roundworms.
Oh, yeah, roundworms. Aren't those intestinal parasites?
Yep. They live in the intestines and can cause all sorts of digestive problems.
Not fun at all. All right, so we've covered the four main types of microorganisms: viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites.
A whole menagerie of microbes.
A menagerie. That's a good word for it. Now, your next point is about some terms that are often used when we talk about infections, and you want to clarify the differences between them. Infection, colonization, and disease.
These terms can be confusing, yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of similar but also different, and it's important to know what each one means. So let's start with infection. What exactly does it mean for something to be infected?
Well, an infection occurs when an infectious agent, like one of the microbes we just talked about, gets into your body.
So a virus or bacteria, for example, gets into your body.
Right. And then your body's immune system, your natural defenses, kick into gear and try to fight it off.
Okay, so there's a battle going on inside.
Exactly. It's like a microscopic war. And the thing is, you could be infected without even knowing it.
Really?
Yeah. You might not have any symptoms at all. Or the symptoms might be so mild that you don't even notice them.
So you could be carrying around an infection and spreading it to others without even realizing it.
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why infection control is so important.
Right. Okay, so infection is when an infectious agent gets into your body and your immune system tries to fight it off. What about colonization?
Colonization is when the infectious agent is present in your body and multiplying.
So it's there and it's making more copies of itself.
Exactly. But the key difference is that it's not causing an infection or any symptoms.
So you're carrying the microbe, but you're not sick.
Right. It's kind of like the microbe is just hanging out, minding its own business, and your body is keeping it under control.
Yeah.
Or it might be in a place in your body where it's not causing any harm.
Interesting. So you can be colonized without being sick. What about disease then?
Disease is when you actually get sick.
It's the illness itself.
Exactly. It's what happens when an infection causes enough damage to disrupt how your body normally functions.
So you have symptoms, you feel unwell.
Right. And those symptoms are specific to the particular disease.
Okay, so infection is the initial invasion. Colonization is when the microbes are there but not causing problems, and disease is when you're actually sick.
It's a great way to put it.
Awesome. Okay, learner, moving on. You asked us to match some terms related to how infections spread with their definitions. This is often called the chain of infection.
The chain of infection, yep. It's a useful way to visualize how infections move from one person to another.
Right. So the first term is mode of transmission. How would you describe that?
The mode of transmission is basically how the infectious agent gets around. It's the way it travels from one place to another.
Okay, like the transportation method for the germ.
Exactly. Like, is it traveling through the air, in water, on someone's hands?
Okay, that makes sense. What about portal of exit?
The portal of exit is how the germ leaves its source. So the source is where the germ is living and multiplying, like a sick person.
Okay, the source is like the germ's home base.
Right, and the portal of exit is how the germ gets out of that home base.
Like if the source is a sick person, the portal of exit could be their mouth or nose.
Exactly. When they cough or sneeze, the germs are exiting their body.
Okay, so mode of transmission is how it travels, and portal of exit is how it leaves its source. What's the next one?
Source of infection.
Source of infection. So that's pretty straightforward, right? It's like, what is the source of the infection?
Yep. It's the person, animal, object, or even the environment that's carrying the germ and can spread it to others.
Okay, the source of infection is where the germ is coming from. What about susceptible host?
A susceptible host is just a fancy way of saying someone who can get infected.
Like someone who's vulnerable to the germ.
Exactly. Some people are more susceptible than others, depending on their age, their health, and other factors.
So a susceptible host is someone who's at risk of getting sick. Okay, what about portal of entry?
Portal entry is how the germ gets into the susceptible host.
Okay, so it's the way the germ enters the body.
Yeah.
What are some examples of portals of entry?
Oh, lots of them. Cuts in the skin, our mouths and noses, our eyes.
Right, any opening in the body, basically.
Exactly. And then the last one is factors that impact susceptibility.
Factors that impact susceptibility. So this is about what makes someone more or less likely to get infected.
Exactly.
Okay, so like age, overall health, if they're already sick with something else.
Yep, all of those things. Also, how much they were exposed to the germ. The more you're exposed, the more likely you are to get sick.
Right, that makes sense. A list of different things that can be sources of infection, what we call reservoirs, just to talk about how infections can be transmitted from each one.
Love this. It's all about understanding those transmission pathways.
Totally. So let's start with water. What are some ways that infections can be transmitted through water?
Well, the most common way is by drinking contaminated water. Like if the water supply is contaminated with bacteria or viruses.
Right, that's why we have water treatment plants to make sure our drinking water is safe.
Exactly. And then you can also get infections from water through contact.
Contact with the water.
Yep, like if you swim in contaminated water and you have a cut, the germs can get into your body that way.
Okay, that makes sense. So water can be a source of infection through both ingestion and contact.
Exactly.
What about people? How are infections transmitted from one person to another?
Oh, so many ways. But one of the most common in a healthcare setting is through the incorrect use of PPE,
PPE.
personal protective equipment,
Right.
like gloves, gowns, masks.
Right, the protective gear that healthcare workers wear.
Yep. If you're not using PPE correctly or consistently, then you can easily transfer germs from one person to another.
Oh, yeah, because you're in contact with people's bodily fluids, so you got to protect yourself.
Exactly. So, for example, if you have a cut on your hand and you're not wearing gloves and you touch someone who has an infection,
Or you touch a contaminated surface and then you touch your face.
right, or you could spread germs through droplets.
Droplets.
Like when someone coughs or sneezes, they spray out those tiny droplets, remember?
Yeah.
If those droplets land on you and you're not wearing a mask, you could inhale the germs.
Okay, so PPE is crucial to break that chain of transmission.
It's our best defense.
All right, what about animals? You specifically mentioned Australian bat lyssavirus, or ABLV.
ABLV, that's a serious one.
So how does that usually spread to humans?
The main way is through bat bites or scratches, or if you come into contact with bat saliva.
Like if a bat bites you or scratches you.
Exactly. Or even if you touch something that has bat saliva on it and then you touch your eyes, nose, or mouth.
Oh, that's a scary thought.
It is. And the virus can be present in the bat saliva even if the bat doesn't look sick.
So you might not even know if a bat is infected.
Right. That's why it's so important to be careful around bats and to never handle them without proper training and protection.
Got it. What about bird flu or avian influenza? How do people usually get infected with that?
Bird flu usually spreads through contact with infected birds or their droppings.
Like poultry farmers.
Poultry farmers are definitely at risk, yes. But anyone who handles birds, especially live poultry, needs to be careful. And it's not just about direct contact with the birds themselves. You can also get infected from touching surfaces that have been contaminated with bird droppings,
Wow.
or by inhaling dust that contains dried bird droppings.
That's why good hygiene practices are so important when you're working with birds.
Absolutely. Wash your hands frequently, wear protective clothing, and make sure to clean and disinfect any surfaces that might have been contaminated.
Okay, good advice. What about insects? How do they transmit infections?
Insects can act as vectors.
Vectors.
Yeah, vector is an organism that carries and transmits a pathogen from one host to another.
So they're like little disease carriers.
Exactly. A classic example is mosquitoes.
Mosquitoes, yeah.
Mosquitoes can carry a parasite that causes malaria.
Oh, right. Malaria is a really serious disease.
It is, and it's transmitted when an infected mosquito bites a person.
So the mosquito bites an infected person, picks up the parasite, and then transmits it to the next person it bites.
Exactly. And there are other insects that can transmit diseases too, like ticks and fleas.
Right, they can carry diseases like Lyme disease and the plague. Okay, so insects can be a significant source of infection. What about blood and other body fluids? How are infections transmitted through that route?
Blood and body fluids can carry a variety of pathogens, and the main way they're transmitted is through direct contact.
Direct contact, like when?
Like if you get a needle stick injury,
Oh, right.
or if you have an open wound and it comes into contact with infected blood.
Or if you get a splash of blood in your eye.
Exactly. Or even just touching a contaminated surface and then touching your eyes, nose, or mouth.
So it's important to handle blood and body fluids with extreme caution.
Absolutely. Always wear gloves and other appropriate PPE and follow proper cleaning and disinfection procedures.
Okay, we also have food and water listed separately as reservoirs. How can infections be transmitted through food and water?
Food and water can be contaminated with all sorts of nasty things: bacteria, viruses, parasites.
And if we eat or drink contaminated food or water, we can get sick.
Exactly. It's called foodborne illness or waterborne illness.
And this can happen in a lot of different ways, right?
Lots of ways. The food might not have been cooked properly, it might have been stored at the wrong temperature, or it might have come into contact with contaminated surfaces.
Right. And water can be contaminated by sewage, agricultural runoff, or even just by people not washing their hands properly before handling food.
Exactly. So food and water safety is super important. Always wash your hands before you handle food, cook food thoroughly, and store food properly to prevent contamination.
Great advice. What about waste? How can waste transmit infections?
Waste, especially medical waste, can be teeming with pathogens.
Yuck.
I know, right? And if you're not careful when handling waste, you can easily spread those germs.
Like if you don't wear gloves when you're emptying a bin?
Exactly. Or if you don't seal the bin properly. Or if you don't dispose of the waste in a safe and appropriate way.
Okay, so always handle waste carefully, wear gloves, and follow proper disposal procedures.
Always.
All right, soil is next on our list. And you gave Legionella bacteria as an example. How do we get infected from soil?
Legionella bacteria are found naturally in soil and water, and they can cause a type of pneumonia called Legionnaire's disease.
Legionnaire's disease, right.
Yep. And people can get infected by inhaling contaminated water droplets or dust. So if you're working with soil, especially potting mix, it's important to take precautions.
Like wearing a mask.
Exactly. A mask can help to prevent you from inhaling those contaminated particles.
Okay, good to know. And finally, we have the scenario of a rubbish bin with a discarded needle.
Oh, that's a dangerous one.
So if someone accidentally gets pricked by a contaminated needle, what's the method of transmission there?
That's called a percutaneous injury.
Percutaneous.
It just means that the needle pierces the skin.
Oh, okay.
And if the needle is contaminated with a pathogen, it can be directly injected into the bloodstream.
Right, a direct route for the germ to enter the body. Okay, so we've covered a lot of different ways that infections can be transmitted.
We have. It's amazing how easily those little microbes can spread.
It is, which is why infection control is so important. Speaking of which, your next point focuses specifically on needle stick injuries.
Needle stick injuries, those are serious business.
Yeah, we just talked about how they can transmit infections.